Oh. All right. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Open Wheel FM podcast. My name is Nicholas Clay, and on this episode today, if you're watching this with visuals, you will probably notice that I am not in my room and I am doing this outside. It's just too good of weather right now out here in Tennessee not to do some podcasting outside and enjoy this beautiful weather. So with that all being said and done, we have a lot to talk about in the second episode. If at any point you guys love what you are hearing and listening to, make sure that you like, subscribe on your platform of choice. I am on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. So you can find me in a plethora of places. But with all of that, just wanted to clean all of that out. We are less than 2 weeks away, where we have probably the biggest spectacle in IndyCar just around the corner, and that is the Indianapolis 500. But we can't forget about that road course, although it's probably one of the least known, I guess, tracks. Like, people don't really care too much about it. This week in IndyCar on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course, there was a pretty decent amount of racing, and we're going to kind of dive in and talk about that as well. Also coming into this weekend, Alex Palou was looking to potentially continue his dominance in recent times on this track. I won't spoil it if you haven't and you're listening to this live. I'll kind of talk a little bit about that as we get into the actual race and all of the action that transpired, because there was a lot of things to talk about in that. But yeah, this is Open Wheel FM. I'm really, really excited to be back for a second episode. I thought the first one was pretty good. It was a little bit longer than I had intended. I know there was some moments where I was going on a tangent and talking. This is all, by the way, entirely improv. I mean, I do have a script in front of me and on my iPad here, but everything that I do on this podcast is really just off the top of my head. Like, I just want to be able to do that. And this is a solo cast. I don't have any guest with me either, so being able to fill airtime can be a bit of a challenge, but the goal is I'm going to improve and work on that, and hopefully the things that I talk about and discuss in the second episode is something that is of interest to you guys. So I did want to start off with the first area, because this is an open wheel podcast. We talk about Formula E, we talk about IndyCar, and we talk about Formula One. So I wanted to kind of kickstart us off on something that had transpired at the start of the previous week, which was that F1 basically came out and made an official statement saying that they would be moving away from the much criticized 50-50 split in the power unit for this year. Now, that means that the 50-50 will be around for this year. I don't want to confuse that for anyone that's listening in. They are going to be making those alterations and changes to that split, that balance of 50-50, going into 2027, which means for the rest of this year, we're going to be stuck with the 50-50, and but I guess there is a little bit of hope, a little bit of hopium down the line here in 2027, as there will be some changes going on. So I wanted to dive in and talk a little bit about that. So basically, if you've been living under a rock, Formula One, basically we've had a power split evenly between the combustion engine and the electrical systems, completely 50-50. What we've gotten so far in the first handful of races this year has been anything but spectacular. There's been a plethora of issues on the qualifying side, and it's really given us a challenging situation and has given a headache for not only just the governing body on how they want to basically go about this 2026 season, having already missed 2 races because of the wars in the Middle East that are going on. But also as us as fans, like there's things that we're like, this doesn't feel right. And we get it, right? It's, at least for me, I understand, right? We're trying new things, but we've also moved into a space where it just really seems like no one is actually happy with what's going on. Some of the higher ups will gaslight and will say things. I don't really think that is, it's just a cover up at this point. So, the FIA came out, made an official statement saying that, and this is directly quoted from them, that the measures agreed in principle today for 2027 would see a nominal increase in the internal combustion engine power by approximately 50 kilowatts, alongside a fuel flow increase and a nominal reduction of the energy recovering system by approximately 50 kilowatts. So we're going to see more emphasis be put on the ICE, the ICE, going into 2027. This is a pretty big change, and hopefully one that will get us back into a position where the racing feels more flat out throughout. It just doesn't really seem like, I can understand, and I'm a huge fan of Formula E, and I'm a huge fan of the technology, the understanding, the different type of racing. I just don't think that the energy harvesting and this battery fits Formula One. I think Formula E has that market, and deserving so. You know, they've been criticized as like not a great series, but they have that, right? Formula One needs its own identity for what it is. It can't exist as Formula E 2.0. And really, I agree with that sentiment, that if we are in a series that is entirely energy starved, and these cars that are supposed to be the world's fastest cars, if they're not producing that on track, then what spectacle are we getting from this? Now, I want to, and I'm going to be putting this article down below in the comments of this podcast episode specifically, or in the description, not the comments, but feel free to enter into the comment section if there's anything that you want to say about this, or your thoughts on some of the things that I'm saying, if you're critical of the same things that I am, or if you disagree with them. But in the description below, I will be linking an article by the race. John Noble came out and made some pretty good points, saying that although it is celebratory that these 50-50 changes are, you know, they're going more towards the ICE and less to the battery, that it's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows. In fact, there's probably going to be a lot of conversations happening throughout this year, because there's some elephants in the room that need to be addressed, specifically with some of the comments that the FIA said about the changes that they're going to make. Noble he pointed out that they wanted a fuel flow increase, and having a fuel flow increase essentially means that you need to have a much larger fuel tank. And in order to encompass that change, there will need to be changes to the chassis side of the car. And rumor and paddock conversations in F1 have said that teams fully expected going in from 2026 that they would probably keep their 2026 chassis into 2027. But, and a lot of that it has to do with the cost cap, but the teams were not anticipating that the changes would be made so drastically so quickly, especially with teams they'd rather put their money into the R&D rather than having to fully design to encompass the new rule change. So Noble was saying that there may need to be a compromise made, either to increase the cost cap in terms of like giving it a leeway, like a leeway status per se, something that would allow teams the ability to be able to make those changes to the car without taking away from the R&D, because we still want the racing to be good, and we want the spectacle to be good, and we want the technology to grow and improve. hopefully at the end of this regulation cycle, no matter how we agree or disagree with what they've given us, we just hope that the research and development done on the cars in 4 years' time is going to be so much better. And they can only do that if they're not having to completely change the chassis of their car year over year and completely change up what they had planned going in. So there may need to be a little bit of compromise made on the FIA's front about that. But the other issue that was also brought up in this article that I think should be addressed is the ADUO. Now, the ADUO for the teams that are in the back right now could actually benefit quite significantly from this if they are going to more like a 60-40 split in the car. And the reasoning is that by having that additional time to be able to research and develop and do the things necessary, like having the money forked over, and there's already talk that Honda is going to get like a $19 million. All the teams came together and said, you know, Honda is so far behind, we cannot have this. They almost feel bad. I don't know. It also probably doesn't help that you have them so far behind in the development race with Honda potentially wanting to exit and leave already. It just doesn't look good. So the teams are willing to say, well, Honda, you're so far behind, we're willing to give you even more additional time in that. And that could be quite pivotal for a team to have not only the additional time in the ADUO period, but also going in and completely changing what the powertrains are in 2027 could give a huge benefit for those who are in the back. And that would mean that you would have to get teams like Mercedes on board with that. They may not be on board with that. Teams like Ferrari would probably be on board with that. And so it'll be interesting to see how the political landscape, you had David Malukas and you had Pato O'Ward. And they're here, they're sitting, and they got, and Palou got asked the question regarding the push to pass, because IndyCar basically came out and said that there would be some changes, more specifically to when you can use the push to pass in IndyCar. This has been something that I think a lot of fans of IndyCar have been asking for, is the transparency side from this organization, this pseudo organization that was formed and created last year. You know, what would come out of this, right? Where would they, with how I was kind of segueing into that. So IndyCar made an announcement before the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course that they were making changes to the push-to-pass system for all subsequent road and street circuits for the rest of the season and forthcoming. The changes were a clarification that basically expanded the availability and the use of push-to-pass throughout a race. TLDR, basically the drivers and the teams can use the push to pass whenever they feel like it. If they use it within a time that they are not supposed to use it, then they will be penalized. And so what this does is that the following of the onus is on the drivers and the teams, really. So you can use the push to pass on restarts. You can use them basically wherever is allowed, with the exception of the start, obviously, and some other things like if you're in the pit lane or in a yellow flag situation. But pretty much you're kind of able to use this push to pass, I guess, strategically when you can. And so this all came out when at Long Beach this last year, there was 12 cars that had utilized this push-to-pass system. I think it was on lap 62 of a restart. And it was an error on IndyCar. IndyCar came out and said it was their fault that they enabled this feature during the race. And so there was 12 cars on track that used this feature. And after the race, although there wasn't really any significant things that had come out of it except for the fact that it was announced that there was 12 drivers. We didn't even know who the 12 drivers were. They ended up giving us that with this announcement, who the 12 drivers were. And it brought into light again what are the exact times or the exact ways that you can use push to pass. And if you turn back about 2 years ago with Penske and, when they modified their ECU to use the push to pass illegally on restarts, they got penalized for that. But Joseph Newgarden basically said that a lot of drivers are just pushing the button. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, confusion around, when you can use the push to pass. And if the option is there and you're able to use the push to pass, then but the onus on when you can use the push to pass, because it's going to be on the entire time, is on you, yourself, and the team. Is this a cop-out by IndyCar? I think there's a great video by David Land that I will be linking in this episode as well. I know there's some people that don't love David Land. I think he made a really good point about this. He basically said that what has happened here with the rule change for IndyCar to allow this to happen whenever you want, and that the onus is that it kind of eliminates the controversy at Long Beach by saying, okay, well, now for the rest of the season, you can use the push to pass whenever you want. So we're not going to have an issue like this again. And if there is an issue that happens, it's not IndyCar's fault. And so it's a way to kind of put, if something happens, it gets rid of the gray area, right? Now all the drivers know that they can use it whenever they want to. They can't say that they didn't know or that they... But if everyone has... you're not really going to see much of the effect of the restart until, later on in the race, if there's a restart. If someone only has, 4 seconds of push to pass versus someone that has 55 seconds of push to pass, right? So if everyone's using the push to pass on a restart, it's kind of null in a way, I guess. Maybe there's some strategy. I don't really see that to be true. So I love the transparency. I love the fact that they basically came out and said, this is what we're doing. Is it kind of just a cop-out or an easy way to get away from it? Yeah, but I guess, maybe IndyCar wants there to be less gray area. They don't want to have to answer those questions. They want to say, well, this is the book. This is when you can. Or basically when you can't, and any other time you can. So if you use it when you can't, you'll get penalized for it. So I guess here, I don't know. And I know that there's been a lot of controversy with the hybrids and issues with that. I know I was watching the latest episode by Hinch and Rossi, and he was saying that these push to pass things end up actually being a pretty big issue for some of the cars, and why they end up DNFing sometimes during the race. So it'll be interesting to see how this all goes. It's now the team's problem, and so have to wait and see how that goes. But I guess what you're actually here for is to hear my thoughts on the road course this weekend. I took all of these beautiful notes. Obviously, if you are on the audio version, well, you'll just be listening to me say it. But let's just start off with qualifying, because there was a bit of a change in qualifying that was supposed to happen on Friday, but was moved because of torrential rainfall. It was pretty rainy. I know that Alexander Rossi would say, we should have raced and win, can you race? IndyCar doesn't have intermediate tires. And so Formula One, so when can they race in, I guess, wet conditions is to be determined. Maybe that's something that IndyCar may need to look at. I don't know. But they did move it to the warm-up period that was supposed to happen on Saturday. They did qualifying there. So they rescheduled it. I did make some notes on the qualifying. There was an issue with the clock. And if you know, in motorsport, the clock is very important. There was an issue where clock times and stuff were not being relayed. I guess they were still counting, I think, is what was going on. But, us as spectators, it looked like no one was racing. Kind of weird, but also this has been an issue with IndyCar in the past, with certain things coming up, certain problems, and that being timing sometimes being an issue. I don't really, you don't really see timing issues being that much of an issue in Formula One. So that's definitely something that IndyCar needs to look at. They were able to sort it out relatively quickly though, and it kind of didn't really affect much of the rate, like the actual what was going on, other than drivers were frustrated. They couldn't, the teams didn't know what was going on, what times they needed to, they had no information. Kyle Collette made it out into the top 12 from Group 1, knocking off Alexander Rossi by 1,000th of a second. I guess the name of this episode is Alexander Rossi. Just kidding. But yeah, so he knocked him off by 1,000th of a second to reach the fast 12. So a pretty good performance by him, the rookie driver. And there was actually a lot of rookie drivers this weekend that did pretty well, and I'm going to talk about them in the race section. Group 2 comes in, and Alex Palou does Alex Palou things, and he looks like he's the guy to beat. I mean, it is Alex Palou versus himself in this qualifying session. The top 12 come through, and everyone has 2 sets of sticker sauce. Now, one of the things that teams were finding was the degradation around a lap was a little bit, the delta was kind of considerable between, those soft tires and then, your alternates. So there was some conversation on whether or not you would save an extra set of softs potentially for the race if the softs proved to be, good in terms of, starting the race, but also being able to, go on them for a pretty long time and not see too much comparatively to the blacks. But there was some notable people that did drop out. Kyle Kirkwood did not. He ended it in P9, which is a big disappointment for him, specifically because he's in second place in the championship. So, being in P2 ending in P9 is not great. So he did not make it in the top 6, which is pretty considerable because it looked like he was probably going to do so. Over 5/10 he beat the second place person. David Malukas went on the microphone, being interviewed about him making it in the top 6 but not using a fresh sticker soft in qualifying. Said he wanted to keep his options open, and options open would kind of be the name of the game going into the actual race itself. So later on that day, on Saturday, as the drivers line up in their formations, as they're going around, and the lights go, right, and everyone is given the clear, they're going down into turn 1, and we saw that Felix Rosenqvist got in way too hot, ended up taking out a couple drivers, and basically dropping Pato O'Ward down the order, who started P2 in the race. So really disappointing because he qualified fantastic and he just completely fell down the order. And, Alex gets ahead. Kyle Kirkwood jumps from 9th into 4th. David Malukas jumps up from 5th all the way up into second place, and you're starting to see some of these front runners potentially battling it out. But Alex Palou is pushing this lead, and he's kind of going off a little bit. We see some pretty good moves by Kyle Kirkwood as the race goes on. He passes Graham for 3rd, and he ultimately passes Malukas for 2nd. The Andretti car looks to be pretty quick and race trim, doing really, really well. Specifically, to start the race on, what was a pretty dismal P9 start for him and the team. And, there was some conversation on whether or not, Pato had some damage done from the contact that was made. Kind of looked to be that case, as he was kind of non-existent for the rest of the race. had, you know, the overall changing of the order. I mean, Alex was out front and he was just pushing ahead. Kyle came in P2. There was an issue with the officiating this race. Now, I think if you could say one thing about the officiating, and that was the yellow flag situation. Now, in racing, yellow flags are a part of the race, right? And whether or not a person gets an advantage on a yellow flag or not, that's just the name of the game. That's just the name of the sport, right? IndyCar has had this thing where in the last couple years, they've made changes to when a yellow flag is out and the pit lane stays open. Basically to give people the opportunity to pit. Do I love it? If you stay out there and you're taking the risk, right? Should you be rewarded for that? Potentially. I would agree. Like, that's strategy. Now, there's instances where you need to close the pit lane if something happens in the pit lane. But there's also instances where, I don't know how to say this, there's certain situations where you need to keep it open, and there's certain situations where you need to close the pit lane. When a driver is on the front straight of like one of the fastest like, parts of the racetrack, which is in this case where Alexander Rossi's car just gave out on him. There was confusion. The pit lane was open. There was not a full course yellow that was thrown. And so cars are driving at 180 miles per hour. And this car is stalled off to the side. It's pretty crazy if you watch like some of the onboards and how close they are. It's just dangerous. I don't know. Like it was crazy because the yellow flag, but it wasn't a full course yellow. The pit lane was open. There was drivers who didn't know that the pit lane was open. They also should have done a drive-through in the pit lane, knowing where the car was stopped, to go and get the car and do a full course yellow. But they didn't until it was way too late. Rossi gets out of the car himself because, I mean, he's not going to sit stalled there and potentially get hit by a car going at 180 miles per hour. And so visibly he's upset and frustrated. He jumps out of the car, gets into the pit lane, and then they finally pull it. But this isn't the first instance of yellows, one, either not coming out appropriately, or two, not coming out at all. There was bodywork damage done, like Scott Dixon's car, basically it came off, and this piece of carbon fiber sitting in the middle of the track in a part where you can overtake people on. Cars are having to make avoiding action away from this piece of carbon fiber. I think Alexander Rossi ends up hitting it and making contact with it as well as he's trying to make a pass on Ferrucci, and we just didn't get anything from it. And it's just sitting here, lap over lap, in the race, in a part where drivers are now having to make a conscious decision to say, oh wow, I need to take evasive action at this point of the track because this piece is not, they haven't decided to take care of this. Really interesting stuff. Like I said, it's like they either don't throw the full one or they just don't throw it at all in those two instances. And what I found really funny is they actually did throw a full course yellow. There was a collision that happened later on. Let me see. It was, I want to say, goodness, and I took way too many notes. I want to say it was Felix. It ended up taking him out of the race, which sucks. But I mean, but they were so quick to throw it then and there. I just thought it was just pretty ironic. Now the biggest losers from this obviously is Rossi and his safety, in this instance, but it was also, and basically spend the next part of the race just basically moving up through the field. And that's kind of how their races transpired. There was, the front runners in the championship, but the front runners of the race, well, it was Malukas and Lundgaard. And both of these two, they're going down, and I would say it's probably one of the best passes I've ever seen between the two drivers not between those two drivers, but just in a long time. It was so well done. I mean, Christian Lundgaard, this race was lights out. I mean, he is such a talent. I don't even know how to describe the talent that he has, but he is so good, and he's done such a good job in this McLaren this season, just carrying the weight in certain races. He's looked so good. It's been such a good pickup for Zach Brown and McLaren this year. Malukas, he has less push to pass. Lundgaard has the greater push to pass, essentially, is able to execute a move at the chicane as the laps are finally ticking down. Malukas could have pitted earlier, but he didn't. Lundgaard was able to catch up, was able to make that. In all honesty, I think this was Christian Lundgaard's race to lose at that point. The pits were near identical. They weren't really that much of a factor, but it is just that Christian was able to last longer on that. Some really, really good driving from him as he's able to pass him with 18 laps to go. And that was kind of it for the rest of the race. There was some pretty good movement from a number of drivers throughout. Dennis Hauger had moved up 16 positions and ended the race in 8th. Schumacher moved up 12 positions and was in P12 before he came into contact with Ferrucci in the latter stages of the race and would get, his penalty for that. Lewis Foster, I made a note of him doing very, very well for himself. There was some criticism on whether or not he could nurse his tires. It's his second season, so he's learning as he goes. We've known that he's been a bit of a pretty good quality merchant qualifier, but his race ability has yet to be desired. This race was a testament to that, and he's proven that he's done really well on that, and that he can handle these tires in this car as time has gone on. So with all of that, we had a fantastic drive by Christian Lundgaard to win his second race in IndyCar. We had David Malukas, who nearly won the race. Looked very good and has been a consistent top 5 performer all season long. Graham Rahal looked excellent as well. I mean, he's looked really, really good on these road courses. Newgarden was able to do a pretty good strategy for himself and claimed 4th. I guess what I want to say is could this be, with Lundgaard's success, with Palou in the Indy 500, with Ryan Hunter-Reay coming into the team, could we see the month of May being McLaren's to take? Possibly. The month of May could go to McLaren. I don't know. But excellent drive from Christian. If you can go and watch the race, there was so much going on with the amount of yellow flags, the amount of confusion, the amount of changing of the order throughout the race. It was actually a pretty entertaining race. With all that being said, for a track that's probably not a racing spectacle, and I think people like the road course because it's Indianapolis Motor Speedway. If it wasn't Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I don't really think people would care too much about this track. But yeah, so that was just the brief overview, or I guess not really brief. That was pretty deep. Deep rundown of the road course race. Now, I wanted to shift gears and go into the hot take opinion section of this episode. So this first one is something that I've been kind of seeing kind of circle around a little bit, and that is, does IndyCar have the legitimacy to continue to eat away in the F1 market? As we know, F1 is kind of going through a bit of an issue with their identity, I guess, as of late. We know that IndyCar has tried to make strides to grow and continue to amass the American audience, which is primarily what it is. We know that Formula One is trying to cut into the American audience more as time has gone on. Does IndyCar have legitimacy to take this fight with Formula One in some capacity? Well, the reason I'm bringing this conversation up is the numbers came out for Arlington earlier this year, which was a pretty big success if you think about it, in terms of it being the first race there. The fact that the actual turnout was massive. The racing was pretty entertaining throughout. And so there was talk that there may be other cities and other, people involved in wanting to, have a course, somewhere else. And, with them seeing the success of Arlington earlier this year and people talking more about IndyCar. As of me posting this as well, there was an announcement with that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was completely sold out for the Indy 500 on day one, which means that they expanded broadcasting rights to, the neighboring cities and towns outside of the blackout zone, which means that the watch and the eyes going into this is quite big. There's a lot for this. I think that there's, with the Fox partnership, with the, massive amount of airtime that Fox is going to be having for this race specifically. I mean, IndyCar has the chance to, to stake its claim as saying, well, look, like this is our premier race, right? Formula One's not racing this weekend. At least in terms of the qualifying times, right? In terms of qualifying, maybe there is some legitimacy there. I don't know. I do think that there is. I like the racing in IndyCar in terms of the spec series that it is. It's different than F1, and that's why here on the Open Wheel FM podcast, like I want to give each series its own flowers. I think that Formula One has its own appeal, and I think IndyCar has a lot to gain as more people watch motorsport as a whole. I think that as people grow to like, as more casual, more people in America go to find F1, it will, I think, inevitably lead them into IndyCar as well. So maybe the success of F1 in the American market is actually a good thing for IndyCar to keep growing. And do I see a world where IndyCar surpasses F1? No. But is there an opportunity for fans to enjoy watching IndyCar maybe when F1's not on, as they grow, as it seems like more Americans are watching, IndyCar and F1 than they've ever before, right? I mean, the growth of that, specifically with the younger demographic fan base, has only grown. So I think the question of the legitimacy, I think IndyCar has legitimacy. I think that it will continue to grow and get popular. And I think a lot of that also stems from the success of F1. So maybe F1 has more legitimacy and IndyCar can kind of piggyback a little bit on that. And then the second opinion is how dangerous was Alexander Rossi's stalled car and the lack thereof of the full caution yellow that should have been employed to start the race. Well, I guess as I'm making this video, it came out 2 days ago. I think it was 2 days ago. It was literally the Monday. It was Monday after the weekend. They came out and made a complete thing saying that if it is, I think it's, yeah. So if it is a yellow in its entirety, the pit lane will be open, and that they're not gonna close off the pit lane. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting that IndyCar made that decision after that fact. I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about that, but in terms of how they handled it, I do not agree with how IndyCar handled Alexander Rossi's penalty at all. Or not his penalty, but I don't like how they handled there not being a yellow flag. Let me rephrase that. I do not agree with what IndyCar decided to do about the yellow flag that occurred for Alexander Rossi at the road course. It was unsafe for the driver. I think that it was really telling in my eyes as a spectator for something like that there is a stalled car on one of the fastest parts of the track to not have any semblance for, okay, well, this is an inherently dangerous position for this driver, which could seriously hurt the person. But it's also like, where is the consistency for that? And it seemed like with the bodywork on Scott, with the piece in the road, the carbon fiber in the road, not like, there was a lot of issues where it was like, so when are you going to execute the yellow, right? When are you going to do that, right? Like, when is that going to happen? And it just seemed like they were waiting and waiting and waiting to see when the right time was, to see how long it was, like, or how far they could push the boundaries to that. I was disappointed in it. I'm glad that they were able to address it and say, moving forward, like, this is what we're going to do. I know the commissioner came out and made some public comments about it because, all of us were watching it on the TV. I was like, wait, they haven't done a full course yellow for this? That's crazy. So is it going to inherently change where, full course yellows in that case are going to happen? And it's the argument for IndyCar and for any racing series is we don't want to throw the yellow and have someone gain an advantage over someone else. But in doing so, by doing that, you are inherently changing and altering the outcome of the race in another way. But the premise of when you decide to do those calls and those decisions shouldn't be in the back of your mind like, oh, well, we don't want to give someone an advantage. Because the strategy calls and the way that you do things will always lead to an advantage. Right? But when it comes to a driver's safety in that instance, or when it comes to an instance where the actual race, because someone could suffer a puncture or a race can cause further issues, right? Those are instances where you call those yellow, you call the full course yellow, and you deal with those things. And the back of your mind should not be thinking, we don't want to inherently give someone an outcome by altering it, because by not doing that, you're also altering an outcome in its own way. And I think we definitely saw that on full display this weekend, where the confusion for all that and what happened, whether the lane was closed or not, side of things. There were some things I was trying to work through and talk about. Hopefully, it made a good amount of sense in some capacity. I get it. There might be some higher airtime with some gaps that probably needed to be filled. But I guess a quick look into what is to come. Obviously, next week's episode, I will be going over the Formula E race in Monte Carlo, the Monaco GP. I think Formula E is so good on that track, so it's way more entertaining than F1. So I'll be diving into everything that happens this weekend about that, and then also talking and touching base on the qualifying for the Indianapolis 500. So next week's episode might be pretty jam-packed. That's just, comes with the territory of open wheel racing in the month of May. It seems like there's just a lot going on. But also with 3 series going on, right? Like all at the same time, there's just a lot to go. But I love talking about it. And I hope you guys like listening to it as well. With that, thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, I'll say it one more time. I'm like beating the horse here. But if you like what you hear, make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on your platform that you are listening to this on. It means the world to me, and I love doing this. And it's been awesome. The first week's podcast went great. I felt second week, I think this one went pretty well too, and I'm only going to improve and get better. So if there's any criticism or things you guys have, or you guys want to suggest, or topics you guys want to for me to talk about in next week's episode, feel free to let me know as well in the comments section below. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whenever you're listening or watching this. I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you next week.